Welcome to the Homefront Podcast, hosted by me, Beca Bookman. The Homefront Podcast aims to introduce you to the people, initiatives, and ideas shaping Israel from within. Most of us learn that when there is danger, run in the opposite direction. When it comes to Israel, that lesson doesn't seem to apply. Tourists and foreign volunteers continue to come here despite it being a war zone. Tourism today in Israel, it's a hot-button issue, and we're going to be discussing it today. On today's episode, we have Rivi Frankel, an expert tour guide. We're going to be talking about the current state of tourism, how it has changed since October 7th, and what tourists need to know when they come here. It's a very frank conversation that we'll be having. It is my pleasure now to say, welcome to the show, Rivi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
How is your Zionism doing today?
I think if I had to pick one word, it would be proud. I'm proud to be Israeli. I'm proud to be a link in the chain of thousands of years of Zionists. And I'm proud when I look around the world at Zionists, Zionism, and what we've accomplished.
Let's kick off. What does tourism look like today in Israel?
Wow. So there is tourism. It's definitely not at the numbers that it was beforehand. I think that the majority of people that are coming on solidarity missions or missions of support, or individuals that are coming to support. I still am meeting a few people who are coming just to travel or who are here for business and want to stick in something during their trip. And then also a lot of people who have family here or who spent a year here in their gap year who want to support Israel, not necessarily on a mission, but just coming and spending money and supporting the economy and the people that live here. So we definitely have different kinds of groups of people that are here, but nowhere near what it was before October 7th.
When you say it's not like before October 7th, what's been the biggest changes that we're seeing?
So number one, numbers. And I think that that's for a couple of reasons. I think reason number one is a lot of people are scared to come. They see what they see in the news and they see that we're an active war zone. And so it's worrisome to come here. Reason number two, I think, is money. Tickets are exorbitant. Flights are being canceled all of the time. A lot of places have raised their prices because there's less tourism. And so it costs them more to do the same thing. And I think the third thing is that a lot of people feel guilty about coming here and having a good time. So if they're going to come here, it's going to be to volunteer and not necessarily on vacation. And so they'll rather vacation somewhere else than coming here and being disrespectful.
And the people who are coming, I'm curious because, like I said before, when people here see danger, we're typically taught, run the other way, run. And in this scenario, people seem to go, there's danger, but I'm coming anyways. Why?
I think, first of all, the Jewish community around the world has been incredible. And there's been a real sense of the people in Israel are a family. And if they're having a hard time, I'm going to go there and I'm going to be with them. And so I think that that sense of mission and of nation and mishpacha, family, overrides a lot of people's senses of danger. I will say that at this stage, and really for a number of months already, we're not actively in danger in most places in the country, more than we've been at other times. And so, for example, even during the Second Intifada, where I think in Jerusalem it was much more dangerous than it is today, there were still people that were coming to show that solidarity and to support the country and the nation. So I think that that's definitely a part of it. And going back to kind of what I just said, I think a lot of people who are familiar with Israel know that it's still okay to come. I mean, you and I live in Jerusalem. We're neighbors, and most of the time we walk around the street, and while there's a sense of heaviness in the air, I don't know about you, but I don't feel any more in danger than I have at other time periods in Israel. In fact, there are times where I remember, for example, what we called the Naifafada, where I wouldn't listen to music with my headphones because I was scared that somebody might ram a car into me or there might be someone behind me. And that sense of security or lack thereof is not prevalent in a lot of Israel today.
There's a lot to unpack in what you just mentioned, but I want to start with, you mentioned there's a heaviness. Things are different. So when somebody comes now, what can they expect?
So it depends where they're coming. I think a lot of people that are coming and expecting to experience on some level the war or the effects of the war. And so they might do that volunteering. They might do that by visiting affected communities or by meeting with wounded soldiers or families of who have been displaced. And so those kinds of meetings are going to be different than walking down the street. I can tell you that the first couple months, You would walk down the street and you didn't really see young men in the streets. You didn't really see anybody smiling. So people don't have to expect that at this stage, but also be aware that pretty much everybody in the country is worrying about someone, whether it's the hostages because they know them or because they're part of our country. And it almost feels like since October 7th, we haven't been able to completely breathe. And the Israelis, if we stop for a minute and really think, everything kind of settles on us. And so we have this duality of living our lives, and you won't necessarily feel that all of the time when you come to visit, but be aware as a visitor that that's underneath the surface everywhere. Our brothers and sisters, our spouses, our children, our neighbors are all fighting. And so even though we can smile and have a good time, that's still there. And so when a visitor comes, they just have to be aware of that kind of sensitivity, because you don't always see that on the surface. Israelis are very good at like kind of brushing things off and not necessarily giving you a deeper look inside.
It's not only that people know people who are fighting. A lot of us also know people who have been affected, businesses, relocation, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting. As a tour guide, that's definitely something that I can speak to. I kind of view the war and its effect on people in concentric circles. So you have the people who are immediately affected, whether that's the people who lost a family member or a very, very close friend or were injured in war. And then we kind of go outwards. And so I think about myself, for example, where I know people who have fallen as soldiers, but they're not anybody in my direct immediate family or day-to-day life. And so it's hard to say that I've been affected, right? It's hard for somebody who owns a restaurant on the Midrachov, the center street in Jerusalem, to say that they're affected when we feel so grateful that we have all the things that we have. And yet, financially, this has really, really impacted a lot of businesses, especially in tourism. We just got back from COVID and then we were hit with the war. But how do you complain or say, I don't have any money or I'm on unemployment or all of these different pieces when you're just really happy that you're alive and you're really happy that the people that are in your family are okay, and you're just really worried. Like, there are people who are literally fighting to protect us, and I'm going to complain about my business. There's a hard piece there, and it doesn't make it any less true. And it doesn't mean that we're not affected, but I think that it carries that weight of what everybody else in the country is also carrying.
I'm basically speechless from, how positive you just finished that note on. But at the same time, people have to pay their bills. They have responsibilities. They have families. They have things that they have to get done.
I think that tourism has lost some of the best and brightest tour guides, educators, ambassadors for Israel between COVID and the war. Because people have to pay bills. There's only so long that people can float on what we say in Israel is like kombinot, so maybe a little bit of unemployment or being able to grab a tour here or there. I will say that this has been something that, at the risk of sounding critical, even though I am very grateful for all the missions that are coming, it is a point of contention because so many groups are coming. And what are they saying? If they're an official group, it's all over their social media and their newsletters. We're here to support Israelis. And yet they're not taking licensed tour guides on their trips because, we don't need them going down to the south, or we don't need them when we're farming. And I've actually written letters to organizations that have hired tour guides for years that we've had relationships with. And I've said, some of my friends, because again, I'm very lucky. I kind of have transitioned out of full-time guiding. There were about 6 months where I had no work, but now I am full-time employed. But I have friends who are just over the age of Miluim, 5 or 6 kids at home. And when Hanukkah came, they couldn't afford to do nice things for their kids because they were worried about paying rent and putting food on the table. And so I reached out to some of these organizations, and basically, if I got a response back, the response was, well, this isn't something that we can really advertise about, or this isn't something that looks the same as sending the 75th teddy bear to a kid who is displaced from the north. And so let's send them 75 teddy bears instead of 2 teddy bears, and also thinking about the tour guide's kids. And again, it's so hard because they're living in their homes, their parents are home, but that's not to say that the effects of the war aren't deep for them as well. And so I would ask anybody who's coming, whether you're coming with a mission, whether you're coming as an individual, think about the tourism industry. Think about hiring a tour guide for a day or two. Think about what kind of drivers are you using? And if you have the financial, some people, they're coming and they're spending all their money on flights and hotels. But if you have the financial ability, think about spreading support and solidarity also that way.
When people come to Israel, what are they doing nowadays?
So it really runs the gamut. I mean, you have people that are coming to visit friends and family. You have people that are coming, Jews and non-Jews, to work the land, to help rebuild, to come on solidarity missions. You really have people that are just coming for 2 weeks to live and experience Israel. I actually have a friend who works in high tech, and her company is bringing some of the company from abroad in. And at first she was saying, like, it doesn't seem like a solidarity mission with what you're doing. And the person running the mission said, no, we're here to learn about resilience. Like, if we can support, great, but our goal is actually to teach our leaders about how Israel is being resilient, which I thought was an incredible take on why someone would come to Israel. So we really see people that are doing all sorts of different things. And people are still coming to the old city. People are still going out to eat. People are still hiking. But I don't know of anybody who comes, unless they're coming for a very, very short amount of time with a specific goal, who's not in some way volunteering or bearing witness to the Israelis and to the country that's been affected.
For somebody who hasn't been to Israel yet, what are ways that they can volunteer or show solidarity?
So if somebody hasn't been to Israel and they're not an experienced traveler in other countries, I would say come with a group. There are a number of groups like the JNF, Livnot Ulehibanot, Momentum, that are doing fantastic solidarity missions and that really have walked the line between sensitivity and being a visitor and making sure that it's not Israel on display, which I think is really a concern when people come. So I definitely think coming with a group is a great way for somebody that hasn't been to Israel before. But I will also say this. Israel has so much to offer beyond just the story of October 7th. And I was working recently with a group that's putting together missions. And so they said, okay, and when you guide in Jerusalem, it's going to be in the context of October 7th. I said, if you think that the story of Israel is only the story of October 7th right now, then you're missing the point, because the story of October 7th is in the context of the rest of Jewish history. And with everything that's going on campus and around the world right now with anti-Semitism, you need to show people, you need to experience for yourself the layers of history of Jerusalem and the eternal capital of the Jewish people. And you need to be able to understand that the Jewish story of resilience doesn't start on the morning of October 7th. That the reason that we were able to respond to October 7th the way that we did is because we come from an illustrious history of people who have persevered, who have fought back, who have strived to do whatever they can to live and to live well. And so coming to Israel and just talking about October 7th, you're missing the richness, and I think you're actually missing the Jewish story that continues on October 8th, October 9th, November, December, all the way now until May and June.
And what is that story?
That's the story of the Jewish people. We as a people throughout history have been persecuted. We have hit wall after wall of people that have hated us, that have tried to kill us, and yet we're still here.
So let's get into what happens when somebody goes to the South. I've actually never been to the South.
Okay.
I have not. So this is a new conversation for me. What are people seeing? And I know that you specifically are able to add some more depth to it.
Yeah. So I want to start off by saying that I think 99.9% of people who go to the South or try and go to the South are going with good intentions. I think that sometimes people that are coming from abroad with a different culture and a different style and maybe a different agenda or a way of being, sometimes that can be seen by Israelis or by other people visiting in a negative light. And there's a big controversy. Again, I go back to social media. Anytime somebody posts, is there anybody going down to the South? There will be 100 comments, and half of them will be, it's voyeurism and you shouldn't go. And the other half will be, no, support. So there is definitely a controversy surrounding going down to the South. And it is definitely something that is not viewed as positive by everybody. And I turn to the residents of the South for my cues. I've met a number of the residents of the South post October 7th. I have my own friends that from before October 7th that I've had these conversations with because I wanted to do right by them when I bring people to their backyard, essentially. And I think that when the Southern Flower Festival was coming up and people were like, oh, let's go support the South and go. And when a resident of the South said, it's like having a barbecue in my backyard when I'm not there. And yet so many residents and so many of the people that I've met have been so thankful. I had a group from Australia that went down and you're here all the way from Australia. Why? Well, because we want to show you that we're thinking about you and we care. All the way from Australia? And so I think that those two pieces really do exist and they're very real. And I don't want to minimize either of those approaches. Some groups, when they go down to the South, they go down strictly to volunteer. They'll volunteer in farms. They'll volunteer painting and rebuilding in Sderot and the kibbutzim, things like that. Some groups that go down will go to places that are open to the public, like the Nova Festival site, which has been set up as a memorial. Every single time that I go, there's something new, there's something different. There are often parents of victims or families of people that were taken hostage from there that are there. And so you get to talk to them and they want to share their story. There's also right outside of a moshav called Tkuma, there is, for lack of a better word, a collection of there were somewhere around 1,600 cars that were collected post-October 7th that were burned, shot, destroyed in various different ways, mostly by terrorists, although some by our tanks as we were going through. Empty cars, not cars with people in them when they were our tanks. That's important to say. And so going there and kind of seeing that destruction and devastation, they've now picked a few different cars that they're displaying in the front with the stories of the owners of the car or the victims. And so that's like something that most people, when they go to the South, they'll do. There are also a couple of junctions, for example, Shuva Achim, which is a wonderful place that was started by three brothers right outside Shuva. And it's a pit stop for soldiers coming out of Gaza. Food, shampoo, anything that they need. There's a stage with a guitar where they can have like an open mic or something like that. And so people go volunteer, they'll stop, they'll drop off supplies, they'll make food, they'll feed the soldiers, whatever is needed. And then some people actually go into the kibbutzim. So Kfar Aza, Be'eri, Nirim, Nir Oz, just to name a few. There are a number of them. Those kibbutzim are off limits unless you prearrange. Someplace like Sderot or Ofakim, which were also very badly hit on October 7th, those are open to the public. So the police station has a beautiful mural now and it's been completely destroyed. So a lot of people will go there. Going into the kibbutzim at this point is if you know somebody personally or big donors. And that's also hard because if it's something that the residents are allowing, so then I don't know how I feel about it being barred to people who can afford it. But at the same time, if they don't want people coming, but they also want money to rebuild, you can't really judge that either. And so that's basically what people do. I know that was a little bit long, but it's basically what people do when they go down to the South.
You had told me in a prior conversation that at the end of the day, it's a field, it's a building. These aren't places that necessarily evoke emotion. And you have some techniques that you use when you take groups there.
It actually goes back to what I said before, that I'm really selective about groups that I take to the South or individuals that I take to the South. And at this point, unless I'm able to partner with the people bringing the groups in or the group leader to have some level of control over how the day goes. This, by the way, includes trips to Tel Shomer. We can talk about tourists visiting Tel Shomer if you'd like, but I have quite a few stories. Hostage Square, things like that. So it's not just connected to the South, because I've learned that it's important for me to be a full partner in planning the trip and exactly what's going to happen in these sites, because I've gone to these sites with groups at the very beginning when I think everybody was still kind of learning how to navigate tourism in these areas. And so, for example, I went to Sderot and we spoke to somebody from Sderot who wasn't there on October 7th. He was out visiting family, but was telling us stories of people he knew. And then we just left and we went to have lunch. And I was like, hold on one second. And so as the group's kind of leaving, I went and stood. I've taken, I don't know, thousands of people to that police station, because the police station in Sderot is where they had a display of the Qassam rockets that have been shot over since the disengagement. And so if you wanted people to understand what people in Sderot were living through, you would go to the police station, you would maybe talk to a police officer who was just kind of hanging around, and then you would be able to hold these Qassam rockets. People could get a real sense of the danger and of the perils of living in the Otef, in the Gaza envelope. And so I'd been there, I don't even know how many times. And to see it like that, I couldn't leave. And so I said to the people who were leaving, I said, I'm going to stop and say a perek of Tehillim now. And if you want to join me, you can. And so they did. And I said, I'm going to have a few minutes of reflection here. It may mean our lunch break is shorter, but I'm personally feeling like this is really important. And so I kind of just sat on the ground and sang, which for me is always a way of processing and of tefillah. And I feel very connected. Like when I'm feeling something's off, I like to sit on the ground. And so I just sat there and I sang, and I had a few people come join me. The same things happened to me in Nova also. And I realized that it's important for me to build these pieces into the visit, and that there's time for reflection. So I went down with a group on Chol Moed Pesach. And at the end of it, we stood around. These are people who have never met each other before, literally from all over the world. We had a 13-year-old kid with us, who I actually at first was shocked that the organization agreed to that, but ended up being he got blessings from survivors of October 7th. And it was actually very meaningful. It was a bar mitzvah trip, and it was very meaningful for him.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we had people that were in their 80s, and this 13-year-old boy from all over the world, different levels of religiosity, all of them Jewish. And we stood around Nova at the end. Behind, there's a tent there that was put up that is a place where people daven, but it's not a shul. It's not meant to be a synagogue. It's just a place of prayer. And so we stood right behind it, and I asked everybody to share one word about what they were feeling. Because you can't leave a place like the Nova Festival massacre site without some sort of processing, and even just putting one word into a circle and having other people hold it does something. And I think that maybe one thing that Israelis who criticize people from abroad who come don't realize how much this impacts Jews all around the world.
I can't imagine what it would be like to go to the South without a tour guide, going on your own. And when I say that, I also include that there's a lot of Israelis within the country from other parts who are going to see what happened in the South as well and going on their own. And I can't imagine how hard that is.
It's hard. No, it's like no matter which way you cut it, it's hard. I fundamentally believe that having somebody who is trained, I've spent over a decade thinking about how to help people process group experiences. And so I do think there's a value to bringing somebody like me on a trip. And I also think, and even for Israelis, the value of context, the history of Gaza. What was Yitzchak doing in Gaza? Who are the Jews that were living in Gaza in the Roman period? There was a shul in Gaza with a mosaic of King David. I had no idea. What's the story of the modern civilization in Gaza? What's the story of the disengagement? Putting all of those into context as well, I think is another value-added piece of bringing in a tour guide when you go south. I think for Israelis, it's just as important to go down not by yourself, to go down with a group, to go down and be able to process, to share, it's not even just about what you say. It's about getting back on a bus and sitting in silence with other people. That all holds a power. And I will also say this. You used the word see, to come down and see what's happening in the South. And I think that's a part of where the controversy comes from. Because are they in an aquarium? Are like fish in a fishbowl coming to see the way that they live? And that's hard. And I will tell you that I have gotten people who have sent me ridiculous text messages about taking them south. I heard you can get me into the kibbutz. That was the whole message. What kibbutz? So I wrote back. I said, I think you're probably talking about going down south. This was probably in like December. I think you're probably talking about going down south. You know, there are a lot of kibbutzim. Can you give me a little bit more background on what you're talking about? And it was something that I turned down because I felt like there was a sense of I need to see. And I think that people need to ask themselves why they're going. And I think that framing why you're going is important. Do I really need to go? And if I do go, how am I going? Am I taking a selfie? Right? Like, I can't tell you how many people I've had to tell, don't take selfies in front of a burnt house where someone was murdered. And that is such a blunt thing to say. And it sounds so move-on, like such a given. But for some people, it's not. And again, I think people are so well-intentioned, but we need to stop and think for a second.
I want to take a step back.
Yeah.
Because for people who don't live here, I don't think they're as aware of what the controversy really is. You've described it a little bit, but I want to go into what's going through Israelis' heads. Where is this controversy really coming from? Because it is a big conversation here in Israel.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the people that we are talking about actually know that there is any controversy.
The controversy stems from, is it right to visit the place where so many people were murdered and so many people lost family members and suffered and were tortured? So I think in general, there's a lot of conversation about comparing October 7th to the Holocaust. It bothers me tremendously. I think that they're very different beasts. I think that there are things that they have in common, but I don't think that October 7th was another Holocaust. And that's not to say that I don't think we can draw parallels between visiting Poland and visiting the South. I just feel like it's very important for me to say that I think that there are significant differences and that these are events that are not on par. But is it appropriate to visit the place of devastation and to put up a sign and say, come see this? It's kind of like, why do true crime podcasts, right? Like why are we so fascinated with the idea of like other people's murders? It's like one of the number one podcast categories, obviously after the home front, right? It's one of the number one podcast, and they have all these YouTube videos and people and influencers talking about true crime, right? We do have a grotesque fascination. And so is that what's driving people to come see what happened in the South? And there is a fear of needing to protect the victims and protect ourselves and make sure that that's not what's happening. And again, I think most of those people are still coming with beautiful intentions, and they don't realize how bad, for lack of a better word, right, that is. But I also think that so many more people are coming with real humility and coming to just be supportive. And so I think that brings us to the question of what are the do's and don'ts of coming to or coming on a visit to Israel, specifically or especially if you're coming in solidarity or on a solidarity mission.
That actually was my next question. So thank you for beating me to the punch. For somebody who wants to come right now and they're listening to this conversation and at this point they're going, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't come. How does somebody come in the right way to Israel during war?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, do come. I think overall, my experience and the experience of my friends in tourism has been one where when we bring our groups to interact with direct victims of October 7th, that the overwhelming response is positive and feeling that hug. I have met with families of people that are being held hostage in Gaza. I've met with mothers and fathers and brothers, and they keep coming to talk to these groups because they feel like if I can tell one more person about my child, about my sibling, about my spouse, maybe something will tip the scales. And I spoke to one mom, her name's Julie, her son Bar is being held in Gaza. And I asked her, she had a very hard time talking. She doesn't speak English. So I was doing some translation and she was there with a friend. And I said, this is so hard for you. Why do you do this? And she said, because I love my son and I see that these people also love us. Like, that's just incredible. And it's true. It is so true. Everybody who's coming, they love Am Yisrael. They love being Jewish. Or if they're non-Jewish, they want to support the Jewish people. So come, and also come and don't be afraid to have a good time. If you're coming with kids, go to a local park. Meet local kids here. Talk to people that are your peers here. Go to a restaurant and ask the waitress what their story is, or the waiter. Interact with bus drivers or your cab driver or the person that you're renting the car from. Have real conversations with people. So do come. Do come with humility. do come with a sense of it is not all about you, or it's not even anything about you. Come with the recognition that we are at war, and that even though most of the things that you want to do, you can do, there is a subtlety of things being subdued here. And come prepared for that. Come with a filter. Think about what you're saying 2 or 3 times before you say it. I would even say come to the South. Come, and I don't like the word tour. I like the word visit. Come visit the South. Come volunteer. Come learn about our historical context. Come and hire a guide. Come and really explore. Don't be afraid to go jeeping. Don't be afraid to do something that seems fun. Israelis are having fun too. And yes, we're at war. And yes, we're in a, it's almost like a no man's land. But that's okay. Come spend your money if you can. Buy Israeli products. Buy your souvenirs here. Come with an open heart, willing to listen. Don't expect that people will all want to share. Don't expect people to want to be on display. Be ready for things to change. I can tell you that I have a few friends who live down south who at the beginning of the war wanted to talk all the time, and I had booked a few groups with them. And then the day of, I'm really sorry, Rivi, I can't do it. Okay, that's okay. That's really, really okay. Don't expect that you can solve everybody's problems. I think some people come in and they think they're going to run one carnival for the displaced children, and then they're going to be like the saviors, coming in on the white horse. And what most of the displaced families need is consistency and normalcy. And also, I'll tell you, I was with a group that did something beautiful. They had a dinner with one of the communities down south on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And the people who are in the group were a little disappointed that they weren't serving the food, that they weren't like putting on this dinner. And the organizer said, we sat with members of this community and they wanted to be the ones to serve. Like, don't assume that you can come and you can give and that's what we need. See us as humans, see us as people, and just be open to what's going to happen. Be open to the love, be open to the experience.
When we talk about the South, I personally think we also need to be talking about communities in the North who are also very affected by the ongoing war. There are things happening in the North, and people have been evacuated, and those not evacuated, especially those beyond a certain kilometer, are still being attacked. How is it that we're having conversations about the South, but we're not also talking about those other communities that are affected?
So I think in terms of tourism, there's a really simple reason for that not being part of the conversation, because these are not places that we're visiting now. So there's no one who's going up north, and then the question of, well, can you be north if the residents can't go back there, right? I think in terms of solidarity, it's really important to talk about the North. I also think that for whatever reason, the army spokespeople and the news are really keeping a lid on what's going on in the North. I think a lot of us, even living in Israel, don't quite know, if we don't have family or friends who are serving on that border, how bad it really is. Like, we'll get an alert that says rocket fire in Metula, or we've seen some incidences, unfortunately, where people have lost their lives because of the attacks from Lebanon. But I don't think we even know so much what's going on in the North, and I think that might be on purpose. So in my own humility, for me, it's a lot about prayer and helping the evacuated families. And I think that for tourists, there still are a lot of evacuees here, but I actually caution them, because going back to what we were saying before, these people don't want to feel like they're somebody's charity case. And it's true, some of them do need support and some of them need financial support, but most of them have expressed that we don't want a carnival for our kids every single day, or we don't need to have these meetings are not for us anymore. Meeting with mothers to mothers or things they're for the people coming. And at that point, I think we really need to respect that voice also.
In this specific conversation, I do believe it is important that we address how to keep safe while touring in Israel.
Yeah, so I think some might even think that it's a challenging question, that if you're trying to convince people to come, why would you talk about security? But I often say, even before October 7th, that many people go on airplanes, right? And every single time you get on an airplane, they tell you, this is how you open and close a seatbelt, which you're just like, really? I got here in a car. I get it. But they also tell you about the masks that fall out and where the the closest exit may be behind you, right? Put it on your face before you help others. I have heard that. I don't know how many flights I've taken. I've never actually had to use it. And so even when I'm in an area where I'm not concerned about the security in that moment, I always give people this because I would rather them have the information. The truth is that in certain areas of the country now where visitors are allowed to go, we are still having rocket attacks. I will say that in the past couple of weeks, there has been a large increase of rocket attacks in the area that we're talking about of the Otef Aza. And so having that information, if you are going to go visit the South, is really important. I always make the joke, and maybe I shouldn't joke about these things, but I think that's also part of being Israeli, is making jokes about things that you probably shouldn't. That in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, we have 90 seconds. That's like I could shower and then still go to my miklat, my safe room, in the amount of time that I have. That is not the case in the South. Sometimes you have 15 seconds. Sometimes you don't. And so depending on what area or what kind of visit you have will depend on what your instructions are going to be. So I have been places where I have been farming, and Tseva Adom, which is what they have in the South, they don't actually have a siren. They have a female voice going Tseva Adom, red, code red, code red. So you lay on the ground and you put your hands over your head so that way that your abdomen and your head are covered. Now, generally speaking, the chances of a direct rocket hit are not what we're concerned about. It does happen, but that's not really the concern. The concern is the shrapnel, especially if the Iron Dome intercepts, the shrapnel goes everywhere. And so protecting the soft areas or the more dangerous areas of your body can be important. And then you wait there for a few minutes until you're given the all clear. If you're in a place like Sderot or you're on waiting by a bus, there are lots of shelters. It is important to be safe when you're going. More people fall and hurt themselves that way than actually get hurt from what they're running from or the fear of that. If you are in a moving car and it is safe for you, stop, pull over, get out of your car. If it's not safe, I was on a bus and somebody cut us off. And we had to stop really fast. And a woman who was in her seat actually went flying. And I explained to them, this is why we don't always stop when we hear a siren, because it can actually be more dangerous. So the driver of a bus, but if you're, will make that decision. If you are an individual car and it's safe, pull over to the side of the road, get out of your car, and do the same things. In areas like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, you have a little bit more time. You have those 90 seconds. Areas in the north, you'll follow the time that they have. But most of the areas... So you mentioned this, and I think it's really interesting. The government has said that certain areas are eligible for evacuation benefits. But if you live half a kilometer outside of that, you're still in the same danger area. So it could be that people are allowed to go to those places, and then they just have to follow the specific times and security announcements that are given there.
I also want to add that there is what's called the Home Front Command in Israel, and they put out their own notifications. So it's important to follow those as well.
Yep, and that's an app, and you can just download that. You can set it to the region that you're in so that you're not getting notifications if you're not in that region.
We have a tradition on this show. The final question is always, what is giving you hope today?
So at the risk of sounding corny, I didn't grow up in a particular Zionistic home, and I wasn't allowed to sing Hatikva as a kid. And so I didn't really know the words. I didn't go to a school that was the same bend as my family. So a lot of my friends marched in the Israeli Day Parade, and I wasn't allowed to at the time. And then when I did start saying Hatikva, I had a teacher who said, well, don't say Liot Am Chofshi Ba'artzenu, say Liot Am Torah Ba'artzenu, coming from like we should all want everybody to be following Shomer Mitzvot. And it wasn't until years after I'd made Aliyah, and I've been in Israel for almost 18 years, that I looked around and we were singing Hatikva at some event. And I was like, I don't want to be saying something different than everyone else. And to be chofshi, to be truly free, means to express really what you are. And standing shoulder to shoulder with Kibbutz Galio, Jews from all over the world who have come to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, because this is our homeland, standing shoulder to shoulder with them, singing Hatikva after 2,000 years, all saying the same words. That's a fulfillment of a prophecy. We are living in the times that we could never have imagined. And so singing Hatikva gives me hope. Being part of this nation gives me hope. The future is bright and very hopeful.
Ending on a hopeful note. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rivi.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Naomi Studios. And thank you to all of you for listening. If you want to support the people of Israel, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Make sure to follow the Homefront Podcast on social media, and we'll see you in the next episode.